The judge looked at my wife and said the words she never thought she would hear. Custody goes to the father. And in that moment, I realized the scariest thing in my life was not losing money. It was learning how fast love can turn into a legal strategy. If you think you know who the villain is in this story, keep listening, because the first lie was not even the worst one. 7 years is a long time to build a life with someone, and an even longer time to ignore the tiny alarms in your own head. My life looked perfect from the outside. A clean house in a quiet neighborhood. A business that finally stopped feeling like a gamble and started feeling like a machine. A wife who did not have to work because I could handle it. And a 4-year-old kid who thought my laptop was a magic box that printed cartoons and paid for groceries. I used to joke that I married my wife twice. Once at the wedding, and once again the day my business hit its first real milestone. Because that was the day she hugged me like I had just won an award. She said we did it. Like she had been awake with me at 3 a.m, making payroll happen. Like she had been in the meetings. Like she had stared at the numbers until her eyes turned into calculator screens. I did not hold it against her. I wanted her to have it easy. I wanted our kid to have a mom who was not burned out. I wanted our home to feel calm. I thought that was what being a provider meant. Turns out sometimes being a provider means you become a walking target with a wallet for a face. It started small, the kind of small that makes you feel guilty for noticing. My wife began treating evenings like they were optional family time. She would get dressed with a little too much focus, not in a fun date night way, more like she was preparing for an audition. She would check her phone and angle the screen away when I walked by. She would suddenly care about perfume on a Tuesday, and when I asked casual questions, she would answer with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Just seeing a friend, she would say, and I would nod because I had no interest in being that guy. The suspicious husband with a stopwatch and a clipboard. I had worked too hard to become a stable man just to start acting like a paranoid teenager, so I told myself it was normal. People need friends, moms need breaks, marriages need space. I sounded so mature in my own head. Then came the new rules. Not spoken out loud, but enforced anyway. My wife started placing her phone face down, started taking calls in the bathroom like she was negotiating a hostage situation, and suddenly our shared calendar turned into her private calendar. If I asked what time she would be back, she would say soon, as if time was a vibe and not a number. And the weirdest part was how calm she stayed when I asked. Not annoyed, not angry, calm. Like she had rehearsed the answers in a mirror. And I started noticing other little things. The way she would laugh at texts, but not show me what was funny. The way she would pick fights about nothing right before she went out. Like she wanted to leave with a clean conscience because now she was the victim who needed space. Once she accused me of not appreciating her. I was holding a grocery bag and a juice box in the other hand, like some kind of suburban superhero. And I remember thinking, wow, she is really committing to this storyline. I did what most men do when they are scared to face the truth. I doubled down on being useful. I planned a weekend trip. I bought her a necklace she had mentioned months ago. I tried to schedule date nights. And for a minute she played along. She smiled in photos. She held my hand at dinner. She posted a picture of us with a caption about love and gratitude, which is the modern version of putting a lock on the door after the thief already moved in. And I almost believed it. Until one night I woke up and she was not in bed. The house was dark and quiet, except for the soft glow under the bathroom door. She was whispering on the phone. Not just talking, whispering, like the walls were listening. I stood there in the hallway like an idiot in my own home, and I felt something shift inside me. Not anger yet. More like my brain finally admitting, something is happening, and it is happening without you. The next day I did something I had never done in our entire relationship. I checked our phone bill. Not because I wanted to catch her, but because I wanted to calm myself down. Which is hilarious now, because nothing calms you down like a list of calls at midnight to a number you have never seen. It was a bunch of calls and texts to the same number. Not a girlfriend. Not her sister. Not anyone I recognized. And I stared at it like it was a riddle. I told myself it could be a mom group, a neighbor, a new friend, a yoga instructor. My imagination was working overtime to protect my heart. My kid ran into the room and asked if we could build a rocket out of cardboard, and I said yes because I was not going to let my world fall apart in front of him. So we built a rocket, and I smiled, and my hands shook just a little when I taped the wings on. That night, my wife said she was going out again. Just a quick visit, she said. And I watched her put on lipstick like she was about to meet a camera crew. Then she leaned down and kissed our kid on the forehead and told him to be good. And he said, "Okay, Mommy." And it should have been normal. It should have been fine. But it felt like a performance. She walked out and I stood in the kitchen with the quiet hum of the refrigerator, and I realized I was done being the guy who accepts mystery as a lifestyle. So I did the thing I always told myself I would never do. I followed her. Not like some movie character. No dramatic coat or sunglasses. Just me in my own car, feeling ridiculous and sick. Telling myself I would turn back if she went to a friend's house, because then I would apologize to my own conscience and buy her flowers and pretend my brain had not tried to ruin my marriage. She did not go to a friend's house. She drove across town to a part of the city I had no reason to visit, and she parked near a restaurant with low lights and a patio, and I parked far enough away to not be obvious. My heart was punching my ribs like it wanted out. Then I saw her get out, adjust her hair, and walk in like she belonged there. 5 minutes later, a man I had never seen walked up and met her at the entrance. He smiled like he had been waiting all day. She touched his arm. Not a polite touch. Not a friendly touch. The kind of touch you do when you know exactly what you are allowed to do. And my stomach dropped so hard I thought I might hear it hit the floor. I sat there gripping the steering wheel and I did not even feel angry yet. I felt embarrassed. Like the whole city had been let in on a joke, and I was the last one to get the punchline. I took a picture. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I suddenly understood something important. If this ever turned into a he said she said situation, my feelings would not matter. Only proof would, and I did not know it yet. But that one decision, that one shaky photo taken from across a parking lot, was the first brick in the wall that would save my life later. I drove home feeling like a ghost, and when she came back, she acted normal. She asked if our kid was asleep. She said the evening was nice. She even told me a story about her friend S problem, and I nodded like I was watching a play I had already read. I went to bed and stared at the ceiling and thought, tomorrow I will confront her. Then another thought came in, no. Tomorrow you will learn what kind of person she becomes when she is cornered. Because here is the thing nobody tells you about betrayal. It is not just the cheating. It is the audacity. It is the way the person who broke the rules can look you in the eye and act like you are the one causing problems for noticing. And my wife was about to show me a level of audacity that deserved its own business card. I used to think the worst part of betrayal was the moment you find out. But I was wrong. The worst part is the moment you confront them and they decide reality is negotiable. Because that is when you realize you are not arguing with a person. You are arguing with a story they already sold themselves. The next morning, I made coffee like a normal husband, which is a strange thing to do when you are carrying a secret the size of a truck in your chest. My wife walked in, wearing one of my old shirts like we were a cute couple in a commercial. She smiled and asked what the plan was for the weekend. I remember thinking, wow, she can talk about Saturday while my marriage is actively on fire. Our kid ran in asking for cereal, and my wife ruffled his hair like she was Mother of the Year, and I swallowed everything I wanted to say because I was not going to turn our kitchen into a battlefield. Not with a 4-year-old watching, so I waited. I took him to preschool. I did the cheerful dad goodbye. I watched him disappear into the classroom, and then I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel like it had answers. I knew I had 2 choices: confront her with rage and get a performance, or confront her with calm and get the truth. I picked calm, not because I was saintly, but because I wanted information. When I got home, she was scrolling on her phone at the table like the world was simple. I sat down across from her and said we need to talk. She sighed instantly, a perfectly timed sigh, like she had been waiting for me to be difficult. I said, I know you are seeing someone, and I watched her face for a crack, a flinch, anything. But she stayed smooth. She tilted her head and said, "What are you talking about?" And I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so bold it felt like a prank. I told her I saw her last night. I told her where. I told her when. I did not mention the photo yet. I wanted to see how far she would push it. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You followed me." That is creepy. Do you hear yourself? She did not deny it. She attacked me. That was the first clue I was dealing with someone who fights dirty. I said, "Yes, I followed you because you have been lying to me." She leaned back and crossed her arms, and then she did something that honestly deserves a trophy. She laughed softly, like I was insecure and adorable. She said, "I went there with a friend and her boyfriend. You saw what you wanted to see." And then she looked at the clock and said, "Are you done? Because I have errands." My hands were on the table and I could feel my fingers wanting to clench. But I kept my voice steady. I said, "Tell me his name." She blinked once and said, "What name?" I said, "The man you met." She said, "I do not know what you think you saw, but you are losing it." And right there I realized I was not going to get a confession. Not today. Not from someone who built a whole alternate universe in her head. So I changed tactics. I said, "Okay, then let me see your phone." She froze for half a second, and that half second told me everything. Then she got angry fast, loud angry, like a switch. She said, "Absolutely not. You do not get to control me. You do not get to invade my privacy. You are being abusive." That word landed in the room like a brick. Abusive. She said it like she had been saving it for an emergency, like she had been practicing it in her head. And suddenly the conversation was not about her lying. It was about me being a villain. I stood up slowly and said, "Do not ever use that word to cover your choices." She stood up too and pointed at me like I was on trial already. She said, "You are scaring me right now." And my heart did this awful thing where it tried to protect her anyway. Like part of me still wanted to believe she was just stressed, just confused, anything but deliberate. Then she went for the real punch. She said, "Maybe we should separate." And I said, "If that is what you want, we can talk about it like adults." And she smiled. Not a nice smile. A thin smile like she had just unlocked a level in a game. She said, "Fine, because I am done living like this." And I knew exactly what she meant by this. Not the marriage, the accountability. Over the next week, she turned into a different person. She started disappearing more. She stopped pretending to care if I noticed. She would come home late and act like I should be grateful she returned at all. She started making little comments about my business, about how I am always working, about how the money is not worth the stress. She said things like, "You would not survive without me," which was hilarious because the only thing she contributed lately was tension and extra laundry. And then one afternoon, I got an email from my bank, a notification about a password reset request. I did not request it. My stomach turned cold. I checked my accounts. Nothing was missing yet. But the attempt alone was a message. She was not just leaving. She was preparing. That night, I sat in my office and pulled together every important document I could think of. Business records, tax filings, ownership papers, house deed, insurance, everything. I felt like a man building a lifeboat while the ship was still playing music, and I hated how strategic I was becoming. I hated that love had turned into logistics. I called my best friend and told him the basics. He did not ask why. He did not say, "I told you so." He just said, "Get a lawyer, a good one, not a cheap one." And I said, "I will." The next morning, my wife handed me a paper like she was delivering room service. She said, "You have been served." I looked at it, and my brain did that slow motion thing where letters stop being words and start being threats. It was a petition for divorce, but not just that. It was an entire fantasy novel. She claimed I controlled all the money. She claimed I hid income. She implied I was unstable. She wanted the house. She wanted primary custody. She wanted support that would have required me to invent a second business. And the most unbelievable part, She claimed she had been faithful and that I was the one acting suspicious. I stood there holding the paper, and I felt anger finally arrive, clean and hot. But underneath it was fear, not fear of losing her. That door was already closed. Fear of losing my child. I walked into the kitchen, and she was sipping water like she just finished yoga. I said, "What is this?" She said, "It is the truth." And I said, "It is a lie." She shrugged and said, "Prove it." Then she leaned in and said softly, "You think anyone will believe you? You work all the time. I am with our child. People will see you as the rich guy trying to punish the poor wife." She sat back and smiled again, and I understood her plan. She was going to paint herself as the innocent caretaker and me as the cold provider with secrets. She was going to take my business by claiming she helped build it. She was going to take my home by claiming she needed stability. And she was going to take my child by claiming I was too busy and too controlling. It was not just divorce. It was a takeover. That day I called a lawyer. I did not search for a friendly one. I searched for a sharp one. Someone who does not get charmed by tears. Someone who reads lies like subtitles. And when I met him, he listened without interrupting. He asked for details. He asked for timelines. He asked if I had proof. And when I told him about the photo, he nodded once like that was a start. Then he said something that changed the way I saw everything. He said, "Do not treat this like a broken heart situation. Treat it like a business dispute with a custody emergency. Your feelings can come later. Your strategy starts now." So I started collecting what I needed. Not revenge, not drama. Just the truth in a format the court could not ignore. I requested my phone records. I secured my accounts. I changed passwords. I documented everything related to our child. Pickup times, doctor visits, preschool notes, bedtime routines. I was building a timeline, and every time my wife tried to bait me into an argument, I reminded myself, do not give her a scene she can recycle into a story. I stayed calm. I stayed polite. I sounded boring, because boring men do not look abusive in court. But she was not done. Not even close. Because the next move she made was the one that almost made me lose control. She showed up at my office unannounced with a smile and a sweet voice, and in front of my employees, she said she just wanted to talk. Like we were a couple having a little disagreement, and when I asked her to leave, she raised her voice just enough for people to notice. She said, "See, this is how he treats me." And I realized she was collecting witnesses. Not for the truth, for her version, and I knew then the real fight had started. By the time I realized my wife was not just lying but rehearsing, I stopped reacting and started recording reality. Not with hidden cameras or drama, just with consistency. Every pickup, every bedtime, every normal, boring thing that actually matters when someone tries to rewrite your life. She kept pushing buttons, showing up unannounced, sending long messages full of accusations, then switching to sweet apologies like she was testing which version of herself would scare me more. I chose silence, which drove her wild, because silence gives no material. My lawyer called it starving the narrative. Then the twist came quietly, not from her, but from someone she underestimated. Her friend, the same friend she used as an alibi so many times, reached out to me late one evening. She said, "I do not want to be involved, but I cannot lie anymore." She sent screenshots, messages, dates, jokes they made about me, about court, about how easy it would be to take everything. I sat there reading it, feeling strangely calm, not relieved, not angry, calm, because now the story had cracks she could not patch. The hearing was weeks away, and my wife grew confident. She started telling people I was desperate, that I would settle, that I was scared, and she was right about one thing. I was scared, but not of losing money. I was scared of my child growing up believing a lie. So when my lawyer looked at the evidence and smiled for the first time, I knew this was no longer about surviving. It was about standing still and letting the truth do the heavy lifting. And that was the moment the balance shifted. Not loudly, not publicly, but permanently. The decision did not come with drama, no pause for effect, just clear words spoken calmly. The court rejected her claims one by one. My business remained mine. The house stayed stable for my child. And when custody was awarded to me, my wife finally looked at me, not with anger, not with confidence, but with shock, like she had just realized that confidence without truth is just noise. She left quickly, already preparing a new version of events for new listeners, and I let her, because my story no longer depended on her belief. Life after court was quieter than I expected. No victory music, just routines rebuilt honestly, preschool mornings, work afternoons, bedtime stories that ended with questions about rockets and dinosaurs. My business stabilized because stress no longer leaked into every decision, and I learned something important. Strength is not proving someone wrong loudly. It is letting consistency expose the lie for you. My child did not need a perfect father, just a present one, and I finally had the space to be exactly that. I do not hate my ex-wife. Hatred requires energy I now invest elsewhere. I see her as a lesson I paid for and graduated from. She tried to take everything, and in doing so showed the court exactly who she was. I lost a marriage but kept my integrity, my work, and most importantly, my child. And that trade was not a loss. It was clarity. And clarity is the one thing no one can ever take from me again.